In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe, to you. From failing hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. Take 5, Mariah. We got some important stuff to talk about. Hello, you're listening to the John Huff Podcast. Oh, yay. I have stood on the spot where, legend has it, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. John McCrae of the Canadian Expeditionary Force scribbled the words to "In Flanders Fields" at an advanced dressing station during the Second Battle of Ypres. Second Battle of Ypres is important for a couple of reasons, okay? It has significance for a couple of reasons. If you are a Canadian listener, which most of you are still at this point in time, Second Battle of Ypres, April 1915, was the first action of the Canadian Expeditionary Force in the First World War, okay? War broke out summer of 1914. Recruiting began immediately in Canada and elsewhere in the British Commonwealth, and by the time the soldiers, the first wave, were recruited, trained, shipped overseas, trained some more, and found themselves in the front line, it was April 1915, all right? That's the first significance. The second, within the wider context of the war, and war more generally in world history, it was the first appearance, the first major use of chemical weapons on the Western Front, okay? The Germans thought that they would use chlorine gas to break the Allied lines around the city of Ypres in Belgium, okay? So welcome to the war, Canadians. All of you bright-eyed, enthusiastic recruits, all you guys who signed up to get into the fight before it was over, didn't want to miss it. Welcome to the front. Here's chlorine gas. Yikes. All right, let's strangle you guys to death in your own fluids with gas. Lovely war. Oh, what a lovely war. So here is Dr. McCrae. He's at an advanced dressing station just behind the line at Ypres as all this is going on, all right? He's a doctor working under heinous conditions. 1915, all right? This is now located at what is known as Essex Farm Cemetery. So there is a Commonwealth cemetery there. And just beside the gravestones, there are a series of concrete bunkers. The concrete was added after 1915, but at the time, this is an advanced dressing station, and John McCrae is in there working on the thousands of casualties coming in from the front line, okay? This was a heinous battle in a war of heinous battles. And one of McCrae's very close friends is killed a couple days before this happens, before he starts the writing. McCrae himself presides over the burial. He's seeing all these guys get killed, all these guys get wounded, takes a break from his endless days of tending to the wounded, begins to write this poem, In Flanders Fields. Now, we don't pay attention to the words anymore, do we? If we ever did, those of us of a certain generation and beyond. And the reason is because they gave it to kids. So what's our experience of In Flanders Fields? In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow beneath the crosses, row on row. Da 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 da. They gave us the rhythm. They didn't give us the words. And now it's even worse because it's just that song. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow. And we zone out even further, man. We pay no attention to the words, but we ought to pay attention to the words. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row. Picture the crosses, row on row, man. Back in the day, these are fresh burials, just white crosses, wooden crosses, some off-kilter, rows and rows and rows of them behind the line that mark our place. This is profound, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. There is a very poignant and profound item prepared by the British Imperial War Museum a few years ago. What they had back in the First World War is they had sound mapping equipment. So what they would do is they would put a series of microphones kind of in the line or out in front of the line or maybe behind the line. I don't really understand the tech. But what would happen is a shell would be fired from the other side, and they would use these microphones to measure the sound waves hitting them at different spots or whatever, and they would use that data to pinpoint where the shell came from, and that way you could locate with pretty impressive accuracy where the gun was that fired the shot, and then you can train your own artillery on that spot to take out the gun. So they had this range-finding equipment, they had this sound mapping equipment, and it would print out, they still have the printouts of the sound waves that they could hear happening out there. And so the Imperial War Museum took the sound map from the moment the ceasefire took place, November 11th, 1918, at 11 o'clock a.m. They have the printout of what sounds were happening, and then they dropped in sounds to mimic what's evident on the sound map. All right, they dropped in sounds of artillery, gunfire, explosions, etc., and they created this living sound map of the moment the ceasefire took effect. And so you get just an unbelievable sound of shellfire. I mean, we cannot imagine. We see movies and stuff, and even if you turn them up loud, you don't get it, you know? Millions of shells are being fired at times on the Western Front. This is heinous, heinous activity. So you get just this relentless barrage of shells firing and exploding right up until the moment of the ceasefire. And they did, in fact, fight all the way up until the moment of ceasefire. And then the last echoes fade. And there is this couple of seconds of what must have been the most poignant silence after 4 years of relentless noise. And then you just begin to hear birds singing. And it could be the most beautiful fall afternoon you've ever experienced. Birds just singing. It is utterly profound. And I've posted this before on Facebook, on Instagram, and I'll post it again so you can hear it. It is utterly profound. And this is what McCrae's talking about. The larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. This weird juxtaposition of the beauty of nature, the birds singing, and then this heinous destruction and noise happening beneath it. Human beings, what are you doing? We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset. We loved and were loved, and now we lie, most of us anonymously, blown to smithereens, gassed to death in Flanders Fields. Now, the third stanza of this poem, this is probably the most famous war poem in the English language, in Flanders Fields. Third stanza is problematic, okay? Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. This is early in the war. This is 1915, all right? We're still in the death and glory phase. If you see paintings commissioned at that time or meant to represent that time, there's a lot of this death and glory stuff. You know, the officer pointing forward, waving his men, and then going into this great glory of battle, you know. This was still kind of happening, and this comes through in this third stanza, and they used it. They used it for recruiting, they used it for propaganda, they used it to stir up the home front. To you from failing hands, we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high, and that's problematic, okay? This is problematic, and McCrae, whether he knew it or not, was touching on something that was going to be important for the remainder of the war. If you break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. We're dead over here, folks, by the tens of thousands already. All right, this is April 1915. The war kicked off in the late summer of 1914. By the end of 1914, by that famous impromptu Christmas truce, where the soldiers came out of their trenches on both sides Christmas Eve, started hanging out, swapping stories, sharing chocolate, playing football. Between the beginning of the war in August and that point, you know, towards the end of 1914, the French have already suffered 1 million casualties. The Germans have suffered nearly 700,000. The British regular army, small by contemporary standards, around 100,000 trained men, is wiped out. It's wiped out at Mons. It's wiped out at the First Battle of Ypres. There's hardly anybody left. All right, armies have already been decimated. They did not see this coming. All right? We thought we'd go off to a war like we've had 100,000 times in Europe, you know? And we'd slap each other in the faces with gloves, and we'd trade a few punches and a few folks would die, and then we'd, you know, come to our senses and call it off, or whatever. Somebody would capitulate. The French have suffered 1 million casualties already. This is mind-blowing. And everybody's like, what? We are the dead. If you break faith with us, we have been blown to bits. We have been gassed to death. You know, most of us are lying here anonymously. Our names are lost. Our memories have lost. We've given up everything. Better make it worth our while, Jack. Better not break faith with us. Don't stop it now. Otherwise, what have we done this for? And this becomes a problem throughout the remainder of the war. Even if there was a feeling like, we ought to stop this. You can't. It's already gone too far. By the end of 1914, it's already gone too far, and cooler heads should have prevailed. They should have stopped and said, guys, 3 months of fighting, 1 million of us are casualties already. Just French. British regular army is gone. Germans have suffered 700,000 casualties. Maybe we ought to stop this. They didn't stop this. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep. Do not dishonor our memories. Do not dishonor our sacrifice by stopping now. And it just gets worse. 1915, 1916, the Battle of the Somme happens. Verdun happens. Millions, literally millions of casualties. Can't stop now. Can't stop now. And I think McCrae was maybe already getting a sense of that. And they took that and they turned it into propaganda, you know? But we don't pay attention to the words anymore. We only pay attention to the rhythm of the words. But we ought to look more closely, all right? This is profound stuff. Now, I don't think, you know, we're talking about Ypres, Second Ypres, 1915, the first appearance of gas on the battlefield in mass quantity. The first attempt to break this stalemate between the lines using freaking chemicals, man. As Dan Carlin says in his outstanding Blueprint for Armageddon series, they basically just unleashed raid, you know, as they would on a cockroaches or something like that. Here you go. We're going to just raid you to death. And this becomes a hallmark of the war. Use of different types of chemical weapons to just poison your opposition. This is heinous stuff, man. We don't even think about the words. And in Flanders Fields does what it does. I think the most potent, or a more potent description comes from what is probably the second most famous war poem of the English language, which is Dulce et Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen, the British poet. I'm not going to give you the whole thing, But man, check this out. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone was still yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face, like a devil's sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cut of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori, which we know means it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. Potent stuff, man, but we don't pay attention to the words anymore, and we oughta. And it's the season, right? We know Mariah's warming up in the background. We saw the memes at Halloween. I was at a department store recently, like yesterday, and dang it, if the Christmas gear isn't up already. Can we pass some sort of law that says no Christmas until after Remembrance Day? Can we do that? Can we do that, please? Everybody I talk to rolls their eyes as soon as the Christmas stuff goes up. It's like, give us a chance. Give us a chance, man. Christmas stuff up already. And it's like, whoa, stop. There's another observance we have to make. All right? And I feel a little bit uncomfortable at times now. I mean, we know, if we listen to the show, that the First World War is my historical hobby horse. All right? I have a certain obsession with it. Just rekindled, well, it wasn't rekindled, but it was brought back into the light with the release on Netflix recently of the new version of All Quiet on the Western Front. And I was going to do, this whole episode was going to be kind of about All Quiet on the Western Front, but I got sidetracked, started thinking about some things. All Quiet on the Western Front, the 1979 version, as you know, if you listen to the program, formative for me, all right? I was 6 years old when that was released. It starred John Boy Walton. And it was, at the time, an update of the 1930 classic, timeless All Quiet on the Western Front, all right? This is based on the novel, the book by Erich Remarque, was a German soldier in the First World War, and he wrote his experiences into this book called All Quiet on the Western Front. Utterly profound, poignant, one of the great war memoirs of all time. Produced a classic film in 1930. Produced a made-for-TV remake that was really powerful in 1979, and I saw it as a 6-year-old, and it inspired my fascination with the First World War. I can remember trundling down to the local library and finding one book in a series, a hardback, in a series about the First World War, and instead of just getting the first one, I got like 9 of them, and I carried them home somehow, dragging them, just a little boy, you know? Carried all these books home, and then I was flipping through, and I found a photo of a soldier. I don't remember if it was German or British or what, and it doesn't matter because he was deceased and had been there in his position outside a dugout for who knows how long, and it was quite literally just a skeleton in a uniform. Horrifying charnel house kind of stuff, man. And it scarred me for life. I couldn't sleep after having seen that photo. Somebody should have been monitoring my intake. You know, there's Snoopy and the Red Baron, and there's a skeleton outside a dugout. You know, these are two different things, perhaps meant for two different age levels, but I got into it at that level, and it scarred me. And I had, you know, many years later, I ran across the photo again, had those memories, and you place yourself in the line. You place yourself in the line, and you're like, how do you survive this? How do you not lose your mind? And most people didn't. They did lose their freaking minds. They just didn't talk about it, And if they were public about losing their minds, they shot them for cowardice. Was a different time, was a different people, kids. But it's worth talking about and it's worth remembering. And where I'm going with this is I thought a different take on it all might be to talk about some music that references the First World War, as we are primarily a music podcast here. But I got to thinking about in Flanders Fields, and I got to thinking about how we don't pay attention to the words. We just sort of roll our eyes. We've been through it so many times, ad nauseum, we've heard it over and over and over. We didn't stop to think about it. We didn't stop to think about the context in which it was written and what it was saying. And you can take or leave the third verse, the death and glory stuff. The Wilfred Owen poem was written a couple of years later, all right? We'd been through the Battle of the Somme. We had been through, I don't know if we'd been into Passchendaele yet, but it was coming. By 1917, we'd seen enough to know that to you from failing hands we throw the torch and take up our quarrel with the foe and all that stuff sounded good on paper. But the old lie, dulce est decorum est. This is effed up, man. This is not glory. This is heinous, and it's got to stop. We don't know how to stop it. This was crazy stuff, and I don't know if you could do it now. It was a different generation of people willing to put up with that for king and country and all that stuff, for empire. We don't really think that way anymore, but can you put yourself in those trenches? People have tried. People have tried musically, and that's where we're going here. So we think about songs, I'm thinking specifically of rock songs that reference the First World War. And where do you begin? Well, you begin with One by Metallica, right? One by Metallica. That's interesting because it was the first exposure to Metallica for a lot of people, okay? For many happy years, Metallica didn't make music videos. It was kind of their thing. We don't make music videos. Then along comes And Justice for All and this song One, and they say, all right, we're going to make a music video. And even that was a controversial decision, because normally you made a music video for your single. And your single was a 3.5 minute catchy little jingle, got you on the radio. One is like a 6-minute epic. And it starts with this long instrumental, What's the rule of thumb? You got to get to the first chorus within like 25 seconds or something like that. This is how you write a hit, kids. Metallica's like, we don't write hits, Jack. We write Metallica songs, and there's a long, long musical intro. But of course, what do we know about that particular video is that they borrowed some footage from a film called Johnny Got His Gun. Johnny Got His Gun is about a soldier who goes to war and gets blown up, as many, many people did. He loses his arms. He loses his legs. He loses his face. He's blind. He's deaf. He's mute. And he's lost all of his limbs. But inside, still intact. Utterly freaking lucid. How horrendous is that? And that sort of thing happened. Loads of people had their arm blown off. Both arms blown off. Legs blown off. If you didn't have your limbs blown off, maybe you had your face blown off. This was a legit thing that happened all the time, all right? Most of the casualties in the First World War were caused by artillery. And we're talking about millions of artillery shells being fired at each other. Sometimes in the space of hours, all right? The level of concentrated artillery fire is freaking staggering, man. And so you'd have just a chunk of shell would take out a dude's face, but he would survive. After the war, like plastic surgery, a lot of it was born here. A lot of it was born with how do we reconstruct these people's faces? And there was a French woman, I think it was a woman, who began to make these incredibly lifelike and intricate masks, So you go in with your eyes blown out or a big cavity in the front of your face from a piece of shrapnel that ripped your face off. This happened all the time. Some of the wounds were absolutely nightmarish. And she began to create these masks that she would fit to your face, and they had features on them and a mustache, and they looked pretty real. You'd put a hat on, put the mask on, you could go out in public again and not have little kids screaming at you. And there are thousands, tens of thousands of people who suffered that kind of injury or who had limbs blown off and were invalid for the rest of their freaking lives. Prosthetics become sophisticated here. Prosthetic limbs, arms, hands with hooks on them that you could actually manipulate. A lot of advanced stuff began to happen as a result of these wounds in the First World War. So Johnny Got His Gun, you've got this kid who goes off to war, has everything blown off, and all of his senses, and he is, as the lyrics say, trapped in himself. Now the world is gone. I'm just one. It's just me, and I want to die. I don't want to live this way, and who would? And by all accounts, the actual movie, Johnny Got His Gun, is not great. Not a super great movie, but the way they spliced the scenes in is really harrowing. And you've all seen the video. This guy in the bed, and he's got that weird cone kind of mask on his face, and you hear his thoughts running in his head, and then the camera will look at him from the outside, and his head is moving. He's doing Morse code. He's saying it over and over again. Kill me, SOS, help, kill me, kill me. This is horrendous. This whole scenario is horrendous, but it is compelling enough that even my dad wanted to watch the video. Now, my dad is a history person. I inherited a lot of my interest in history from him. All right. U.S. Civil War, et cetera, et cetera. And I can remember one time I'm watching the video on TV. Dad comes and sits down. My dad is not a Metallica fan. All right. My dad is not a rock and roll fan. This ain't up his alley, Jack. And that is a heavy tune. All right. One by Metallica smokes. Musically speaking, that is an intense freaking song, man. And everybody bags on Lars. But listen to Lars play the double kick on that song, play the snare drum on that song. Lars was great. Lars still is great, by the way. And what an influence on drummers, on rock drummers, is Lars Ulrich, all right? Crushes one. Terrific drum parts. And the guitar work is stunning. But it's heavy, and it's loud, and it's metal. And that ain't what my dad's into. So we're watching the video for a minute. I'm feeling self-conscious and weird because I know I don't want to get in trouble, for watching something like this. So I turn the channel, and my dad says, put it back on the video. So the video is compelling enough that my dad, who hates rock and roll, is willing to endure Metallica to watch this story unfold. And it's heinous. The whole concept of being trapped that way in yourself, unable to communicate, unable to live. I cannot live, I cannot die, trapped in myself. Horrendous, man. Really, really potent, really, really powerful. And that's, for a lot of people, the first reference in rock and roll to the First World War. I don't even know if the song actually references the First World War, but that's the war that the movie is based around. And a lot of the thematic stuff seems to relate to that. So we had One by Metallica. Classic song, classic video. I mean, that's one of the great ones, man. But there are so many others. So many others. Think of Passchendaele by Iron Maiden. Of course, Iron Maiden wrote a song about the Battle of Passchendaele. Battle of Passchendaele, 1917. Also of relevance to you Canadians out there, because after several months of some of the worst fighting in the history of the world, for months at Passchendaele, also around Ypres. This is crazy stuff, man. The whole line. They fought for 4 freaking years. The whole line, basically, of the Western Front didn't move any more than maybe a mile or two, maybe even less than that, through the whole dang war, So the Canadians show up towards the end of the Battle of Passchendaele to finish the freaking job after having avoided this battle for the whole length of it. The Canadians had just had their great moment at Vimy Ridge in April 1917, and then gone into a quieter section of the line to recover from that. And then they get this idea, let's relieve the pressure on the French, because the French army is beginning to mutiny after the Nivelle offensive, which is another disaster. And the French soldiers are like, we're done here. We're done with this slaughter, this pointless, stupid slaughter. We're packing up. Now, they had just endured the Battle of Verdun, maybe the worst battle in the history of the world. You may look at Stalingrad in the Second World War and disagree with me. The Battle of Verdun, I don't have time to do it here, was basically all of 1916. We're talking close to 1 million casualties collective between Germany and France. Verdun was fought in a very, very small space, comparatively speaking. And it was, they dispute this. But the modus operandi, the intent for the Germans was, again, people dispute this, but it's generally accepted, I think. The idea was Verdun was symbolically important to France. So the way you beat France here, if you're Germany, is you attack a place that has relevance and symbolic importance, and they will defend it to the last freaking man. And so our game is, let them do that and kill everybody to the last freaking man. We will beat France by destroying their army at a place where they will make a last stand, and then that's it. The traditional line is, we will bleed the armies of France white. Was it actually said? People dispute that. I don't know. Was there tactical significance to Verdun? Maybe. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter 106 or 7 years later. What matters is the Germans and the French went to battle over Verdun at a cost of nearly 1 million casualties on both sides. This is 1916. 1917, the French are like, not doing this anymore. And there's another offensive that requires the same BS that's getting them all killed since 1914. And they begin to mutiny. They're like, we're not doing this anymore. We've freaking had enough. We're stopping this now until you start being a little more careful in your execution of this war. That's a problem, all right? You can't have your army falling apart and still win the war. So the idea is, among the British, all right, the French are having a little trouble down there. Germans are attacking them. It's a problem. Let's do an offensive of our own and pull the Germans away, take the pressure off the French. And we'll do that once again around Ypres. Because why not Ypres? Now, the British have already gone through in 1916, while Verdun is happening. The last half of 1916, the Battle of the Somme happens. Now, there are parts of the world where you say the words Battle of the Somme and a chill goes through you. And most of that is in England, all right? But also Australia, New Zealand, Canada, other places. Battle of the Somme was a horror of horrors, all right? What's Battle of the Somme most famous for? July 1st, 1916. 60,000 British casualties in the morning. 20,000 soldiers killed in the morning of July 1st, all right? And these were mostly people who enlisted, all right? This was the volunteer civilian army. Remember, 1914, 1915, the British regular army was destroyed. That small force, 100,000 men. You don't need a big army if you are a global naval superpower and an island like Britain, right? Small army, wiped out. And then what we got to do is recruit a new army who are not professional soldiers. They're civilians that we're going to turn into professional soldiers. And a lot of them, hundreds of thousands, saw action for the first time in the Battle of the Somme. And guess what? They got killed. Hundreds of thousands of casualties. So they've gone through this in 1916. The French have gone through this in 1916. By 1917, there's not a whole lot of appetite to do this again. The French are mutinying. The British are going to attack at the arsehole of the front line, which is Ypres, and we're going to do this again. And the Canadians come into the line towards the end of the battle. It's heinous. All right, the whole thing has been flooded from moment one, all right? All the water table, everything has been destroyed by shell fire. There's been more rain than anybody's ever seen. It's a freaking quagmire. People are quite literally drowning to death in the mud of Passchendaele. You don't have to get blown up. You don't have to get shot by a sniper. You don't have to get gassed. You slip off the little wooden duckboard that you're walking on, you fall into a shell hole and drown. They can't get you back out, all right? People are drowning on a battlefield, all right? It is the freaking worst. There's bodies everywhere. I can't even describe what this must have been like. Canadians come into the line, and it's the same line as 1915. It's the same line as Second Ypres. Basically, it's like, wait a minute, we've been fighting for 2 freaking years, only to come into where we were 2 freaking years ago? This is the First World War, man. And so Iron Maiden wrote a song about the Battle of Passchendaele. It's called Passchendaele. It is a big, epic, prog, metal Iron Maiden song. And it's a freaking fabulous song. But then you stop and you think about what it's about. You're like, what were we doing? And at the cost of 16,000 casualties as the Canadian Corps took Passchendaele in the end. This is following hundreds of thousands of other British casualties, right? We came in at the end. General Sir Arthur Currie had kept the Canadians out of this because he knew this was a nightmare and not worth it. And we don't want to go up there and fight this, but British High Command made them. Currie said, look, it's going to cost us 16,000 casualties to do this, and it ain't worth it, Jack. Doesn't matter if it's worth it or not, go and do it. And guess what? It cost 16,000 casualties, and they took it. They took Passchendaele, what was left of it, which was just a bunch of rubble and dust, basically, and bodies. And then next year, 1918, the big German offensive, they lost all the territory again anyways. This is the First World War, kids. Complete madness and pointless madness at that. Great song, Passchendaele, by Iron Maiden. And then I stumbled upon something that was really, really interesting. It was a song by the Zombies. Remember the Zombies, this 1960s band, British band, the Zombies? They wrote this really cool song, creepy, but a really cool song called Butcher's Tale, Western Front 1914. It was on their Odyssey and Oracle record of 1968. And it's a creepy song, and all the music is on a harmonium, which is a pump organ. Really, really like something out of a funhouse. Really, really creepy. And it's interesting because the song is ostensibly about the First World War, but it's released in 1968. 1968 is Vietnam, man. We've talked about 1968, the 60s, Vietnam, hippies. We've been through all this stuff before, man. Check out the lyrics to Butcher's Tale by the Zombies. A butcher, yes, that was my trade, but the king's shilling is now my fee. A butcher I may as well have stayed for the slaughter that I see. And the preacher in his pulpit, sermon, go and fight, do what is right, but he don't have to hear these guns. And I'll bet he sleeps at night. And I can't stop shaking. My hands won't stop shaking. My arms won't stop shaking. My mind won't stop shaking. I want to go home. Please let me go home. Go home. And I have seen a friend of mine hang on the wire like some rag toy. Then in the heat, the flies come down and cover up the boy. And the flies come down in Gomicourt, Thiepval, Mammoth's Wood, and French Verdun. If the preacher could see those flies, wouldn't preach for the sound of guns. And I can't stop shaking. My hands won't stop shaking. My arms won't stop shaking. My mind won't stop shaking. I want to go home. Please let me go home. Go home. The Zombies, Butcher's Tale. And it is as creepy and powerful as it sounds. All on pipe organ, pump organ, whatever. Creepy, man. What a song. The Zombies. And the way it's sung, the way it's delivered, it speaks to the same thing as Dulce et Decorum Est. You know, the people back home talking all this war, pumping it up, you know, putting white feathers on people not in uniform. We're going to lick them this time, boys. Go out there and do your thing. No connection whatsoever to what life is actually like. The preachers back home firing up the kids to go sign up. Same thing as in the original versions of All Quiet on the Western Front. That movie, the book was written by a German soldier. The movie, all of them are told from the perspective of German soldiers in the line, having exactly the same experience as Allied soldiers in the line, you know? This is the weird thing about the First World War. It was this shared experience among these people. And they didn't have a lot of animosity for each other. They know that we're all in this in a weird way together by people who put us here. And we should have bonded together, you know. This is where these fears of communism came. Like, comrades, Germans, we have no quarrel with you guys. We're all just workers. You know, we should unite together, unite all of us, and turn on these leaders who have done this to us, you know? There was weird fears of communism, and of course, communism took hold in Russia in 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution. There were fears that it would happen in Germany. There were fears that it would happen in France, as these people, just working class folks, mostly among the ranks, would bond together and say, we have the power here. If we all just lay down our arms, there can't be a freaking war. And that's partly what the mutinies were about. And it's like, we can't let that happen. Communism will overrun Europe. Dude, right? The zombies. And in the original All Quiet on the Western Front, same thing. The teacher back home firing up the young high school kids to go off and join the war. The glory for the fatherland, Do it for king and country. Do it for the empire. And people fell for it hook, line, and sinker. But then you get songs like The Zombies. You get Dulce et Decorum Est. It's like, if you guys really knew the truth, you wouldn't be so quick to send your kids off to fight. You wouldn't come searching for glory, because there's none here, man. That's The Zombies. Love that one. Before we get to the next thing, which is going to be a little bit longer, going to do the Patreon plug real quick. I know I don't like dropping it in this way, but it's got to be done. There is a Patreon page for the John Huff Podcast. All right, it is patreon.com/John Huff Podcast, where, for the low price of $5 a month, you can support the show. Patreon has apparently just finally incorporated video, which means you didn't used to be able to do video on Patreon that easily. You had to upload something to YouTube, then share the link. It was a pain. Apparently now you can do it direct. So I'm going to begin, hopefully, starting to do some video on Patreon. Make it worth your while just a little bit more. I do appreciate the people who have signed up so far. I'm a one-man band here, kids. I'm an independent podcast trying to find an audience under the weight of all of this big media company, all these celebrity podcasts. It's very, very difficult. Those of you who are musicians know it's difficult when you're outside the industry trying to find your way in the industry. Patreon helps. I want to thank everybody again who has signed up so far to help me with that. Please check it out, patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. Think of it as flipping me a $1.25 tip for every episode I do, man. Feel like buying me a coffee? You can via patreon.com/John Huff Podcast. Now, I found something really stunning in my travels looking for rock songs that reference the First World War. I did a little bit better than that. I found a whole album. By the Swedish band Sabaton. Do you know Sabaton? I had heard of Sabaton, had not paid a lot of attention. They are a big old power metal band, and as soon as you hear them, you think Rammstein. They sound like Swedish Rammstein, except they sing in English, which is helpful. One of the things that makes Rammstein sound so freaking sinister is that they sing in German. Great band. Creepy. All right. Sabaton is also a big, epic power metal band. Those crazy Dragon Force kind of guitar solos, a lot of double kick, a lot of strings, a lot of just big, epic power metal songs. I have not listened to a lot of Sabaton, but I discovered that they had a tune called The Great War, and then I dug deeper, and I realized they have a whole album called The Great War, all right, released in 2019. And the thing about Sabaton is that they are a history band. They have like a history channel on YouTube. And all of their albums are built around historical events or themes. And so they did a whole record called The Great War, which is, as you might guess, songs all about the Great War. Stunning freaking stuff, man. If you like Passchendaele by Iron Maiden, this is your record, man. Go check out The Great War by Sabaton. And there was a stunning amount of relevance to you Canadians out there, because several of the songs have direct reference to Canadian contributions or stuff that Canadians were involved in on the Western Front. Par exemple, the song The Future of Warfare. This is a tune all about tanks appearing on the battlefield for the first time, which they did in 1916 at the Battle of Courcelette, which was a smaller action within the Battle of the Somme, 1916, and it was the Canadian Corps. The Canadian Corps led the battle at Courcelette, Flers Courcelette, 1916. They were accompanied by tanks for the first time. Nobody had ever seen this before. Nobody knew what a freaking tank was. They were called tanks as a way of disguising what they were, all right? So they had this new weapon. The problem in the First World War was it's a stalemate, all right? The war started off as mobile. One of the reasons there were 1 million French casualties in the first few months is because nobody was taking cover. They're like, all right, Form up ranks and march into those machine guns, will ya? And that artillery fire. Not smart, all right? People got killed by the tens of freaking thousands on both sides. And then they figured out, if we stand on the ground, we're dead. If we dig in, we're maybe like 50% chance of being dead. We'll take those odds, Jack. And so what happened is they dug the trenches that are now symbolic of the First World War, and they dug in to protect themselves from the artillery fire, to protect themselves from the machine gun fire. Problem is, the defenses were so strong, you couldn't break through them. And so for many years, they just sent masses of men to try and overwhelm the enemy on the other side, and they just got machine gunned to death. Didn't work, so we had to come up with new ideas, one of which was gas, one of which was tanks. So they're creating these mobile fortresses, the size and weight of a freaking school bus, and they went at the pace of a walking man. These were not great machines, all right, but the idea was they can't kill us. They can't kill the tank. So we just roll this massive piece of armor across the battlefield, and we shoot who we can shoot. We run over the barbed wire, just crush it down into the ground. Maybe we crush a few people too, who cares? And then the infantry can come in behind us. This was a new revolutionary concept in the First World War, and they developed this because we need a way to break these lines. Just sending tens of thousands of men to run into barbed wire machine guns ain't working, all right? We ain't gonna win that way. But they couldn't explain what these things were, all right? We can't say, hey, we're working on those mobile armor units today, so you might want to come down and check it out. No, they had to call them something, so they called them tanks. Call them tanks, that way nobody will know what they are. And then on 1916, at the Battle of Courcelette, here they are, a bunch of them rolling across the field, and the Germans are like, what on earth is that freaking thing? And they panicked because, what? And the tanks were largely ineffective at that battle. They broke down. They got, stuck in the mud. There weren't enough of them to make that much of a difference, but they sure made an impression. And then by the end of the war, 1918, tanks are being used very, very efficiently. They developed tactics. They would use them by the hundreds instead of a couple of dozen. And they got better. And then, of course, by World War II, the tank is king and remains so today. So the song, The Future of Warfare, is about that, and that is a Canadian connection. Then there is a tune called A Ghost in the Trenches, which is all about Francis Peggamagabo. Say that 10 times fast. Francis Peggamagabo. Who was that? He, Francis, was a Canadian. He's the most decorated Indigenous Canadian soldier of all time. He was a sniper. All right, he was Native Canadian, and he became the most celebrated sniper in the Allied armies, credited, and this is awful and horrendous, credited with 378 kills. He was a war hero, the most decorated of all. And he came home and became influential in politics, etc., but he was a war hero. Francis Peggamagabo. And famous enough that Sabaton wrote a song about him called A Ghost in the Trenches, man. And he was there at the beginning. He was at Second Ypres, and he was there all the way until the end of the war. Fought on the Somme, Passchendaele, the Battle of the Scarpe. This guy somehow managed to freaking survive all of that. There was a point in time when the life of a frontline soldier was only expected to be a couple of weeks, especially if you had a position where you were like running the lines and stuff. If you were a messenger, anything like that, you could reasonably expect to die within a couple of weeks. Francis Peggamagabo survived the whole freaking war somehow and was decorated with all the medals you can get, basically, and became a freaking legend for an awful proficiency at killing folks with a sniper rifle. Incidentally, Francis Peggamagabo, I stumble over that one every time, was one of the inspirations for what is probably my favorite First World War novel, which is 3-Day Road by Joseph Boyden. That is really a stunning, it's a rough one. All right, this is the First World War. It's not easy to make that funny. Blackadder did it, but was still poignant because it's kind of gotta be. 3-Day Road is about Native Canadian snipers and doing their thing in the First World War. It is evocative, powerful, awful, mystical. It's really a wonderful book, wonderful novel, and it's one of my favorites, and Francis Peggamagabo was one of the inspirations for it. So there's just another little connection there for you. There are songs of relevance to other armies and other countries. Fields of Verdun, we've already talked about Verdun. And Fields of Verdun is another song on this Sabaton record. There's actually, they do In Flanders Fields. They use In Flanders Fields towards the end. There's a tune called Attack of the Dead Men, which is about a battle in the Eastern Front, Germany and Russia, where the Russians had been so gassed and bombarded and destroyed that when they came out of the trenches to fight, they looked like zombies. And they call this the Attack of the Dead Men, and there's a song about that. There's a song about the Red Baron called The Red Baron. Of course, the Red Baron was Baron Manfred von Richthofen, World War I flying ace, the jewel of the German Air Force, with his colorful plane and all of his buddies in his squadron, all the colorful planes in the sky that they called the Red Baron's Flying Circus. This is the thing about the war, is that there's something, it's horrendous and awful and modern, and yet in some ways so quaint at the same time. So you had this individual personality like von Richthofen, and you could see him coming in his red plane. There's the Red Baron, you know? And here's the flying circus, all these colorful planes flying around him. He was feared and respected, the Red Baron. And this is a story that gets me every freaking time. They shot him down, all right? Eventually, after all the years of him terrorizing the skies and being this celebrity on both sides, there he is. They got him, all right? They shot him. His plane crashed, and they found his plane and his already dead body. The Australians found him, all right? He crashed into a part of the line that the Anzacs were in charge of. The Australians found him, and they buried him. They gave him a full funeral and buried him with full military honors. This is their enemy. This is their enemy, kids. They didn't, cut his head off and put it on a pike. They buried him with a full funeral and full military honors. And the people came to pay their respects, and they placed wreaths at his grave. One of which, and this sometimes chokes me up when I read about it, one of them said, "To our gallant and worthy foe." To our gallant and worthy foe. So old school in such a new school time, There was this weird, bizarre chivalry in the First World War. And it's this juxtaposition that sometimes gets me. To our gallant and worthy foe. Now, all your comrades, we're going to go flamethrow. It's so bizarre that they had this weird camaraderie between the two sides that extended even to the death of the Red Baron and full military honors. And they sent notice to the German High Command. Hey, we got him. We have buried him this way out of respect and honor. And there was this weird chivalry. And the soldiers on both sides, as I've already said, we are in this together. We don't know how we got here. We were not expecting this, but we're having the same experience of awfulness. And I understand your experience and you understand mine. World War II, I think, was somewhat different, all right? There was a lot more to World War II, all right? Nazis, this had to happen. This war had to happen, World War II, after World War I that didn't need to happen. And, I don't have a quarrel with the Germans in particular. They're just like us, really, and we're all just working class folks. And how do we get here? We're students, we're shopkeepers. We're having an awful experience, and so are they. And for what? For what? What is the point of this? In World War II, there was a point. Wouldn't have been a World War II had there not been a World War I, but that's a whole other thing. You see it in the burial of the Red Baron. Here is our enemy who's shot us all down and terrorized us, and we so respect him. We so respect his valor and his courage that we're burying him with full military honors and sending notice to the other side to say, we have done this. Weird respect, weird chivalry, and now we're going to gas you to death. It's so freaking strange. But that's one of the songs on the Sabaton record. And I think this is just really cool. I've only listened to it once or twice, and it's a great record. I mean, great riffs, great guitar tones, big, epic metal songs. but with this history angle to it, which I think is very, very cool. So that is The Great War by Sabaton. I got a bunch of others. I'm only going to talk about one more. The biggest surprise of my research into this topic, which is a song called 1916 by freaking Motorhead. Now you think to yourself, Motorhead has written a song called 1916. Bet you that's going to be a banger. This is going to be Ace of Spades. You know, this is going to be Killed by Death or whatever. 9, I say nay, nay. 1916 by Motorhead from the album 1916 is a string ballad. What? It's a string ballad. It's Lemmy singing nearly in a falsetto. Actually singing, kids. And it's a beautiful, lush, sad ballad accompanied by strings. And the lyrics are profound. It's about a kid who lies about his age to get into the army and go fight in the war. Didn't want to miss the grand adventure, man. And a lot of people did this. They did it by the thousands. You know, you hear stories about a kid showing up to the recruiting office, right? It's like, how old are you? I'm 16. Oh, okay. Well, why don't you go outside and come back in 18? Wink, wink. And they would. And they'd sign up and off they'd go. And they'd get killed. You know, at Essex Farm Cemetery, where John McCrae rode in Flanders Fields, there's a grave there of a kid who was 15, believed to be the youngest person killed in combat in the war. It's there, 15-year-olds, and the boy soldiers on both sides, thousands of them, man. So this song, 1916, is about that. 1916, of course, we've already said, was the Battle of the Somme. The Battle of the Somme was England's crucible. All right, every country had a crucible in World War I, which is a testing ground. The one that you remember, you know? The one that shook you. Canada had Vimy, later Passchendaele, and their experiences on the Somme. But the Somme was the crucible. It's the one that they remember in Britain. Maybe Passchendaele a little bit later. France and Germany had Verdun. It was a shared crucible where we bled each other nearly to death. 1916, Motorhead, from the album, Here's the Kid. And I marched and I fought and I bled. And I died and I never did get any older. But I knew at the time that a year in the line was a long enough life for a soldier. No freaking kidding, man. I already talked about the life expectancy. You know, if you had certain jobs, you could not expect to live very long. Same as a pilot. You know, the shelf life on a pilot was not long. You know, even the Red Baron got shot down. You know what I mean? Really profound stuff and unexpected from Lemmy to be singing a string ballad, you know? Really, really evocative song. Really, really kind of touching. Not what you expect from Motorhead, you know? Very, very cool song. And sad. And there's a lot of this. There's so many others. Radiohead, Susie and the Banshees. There are a bunch of other songs that reference World War I. But those are some to check out. As it's Remembrance Week, and the new version of All Quiet on the Western Front is playing on Netflix. And I have opinions about it that I'm not going to share now because I don't want to spoil them. You know, but if you want to hear my take on it, drop me a line and tell me that, and I will explain. I will say that visually, stunning film. Really stunning to look at. And those of us who are First World War people, a lot of the time what we really want is just to see it. You know? We want to see the experience of the trenches. We're not interested in a romance around it, like the Passchendaele movie. We're not interested in a lot of that stuff. We're interested in seeing frontline life. And that's what made All Quiet on the Western Front so great. The 1930 version is freaking terrifying. The 1979 version was cleaned up a little bit for television, but still striking. And now we've fast forwarded to the year 2022 when we can do stuff with effects like the 1917 movie, some of the other ones. Even Passchendaele had good battle effects, but they're expensive. You can't do a lot of it if you don't have the budget, you know? And so it's a little bit tricky. All Quiet on the Western Front is brilliant looking. It's stunning. People who know more about it than me are pleased because the uniforms are actually accurate. You know, people get hung up on that stuff. Visually stunning film. I didn't love it, but visually it's really, really extraordinary. So go watch that. It's getting late. Holy cow. You know, we're up over an hour now, but we got me on a hobby horse. You know, that happens. check out the new All Quiet on the Western Front. All right. I'm curious to know your opinions of it. There's a couple of books you might want to check out. 3 Day Road is one. One of my other favorite books about the First World War and the soldiers' experiences by a Canadian, Will Bird, who was there and survived it. He wrote a memoir called Ghosts Have Warm Hands, all about his frontline experiences. And then he has another really compelling book. He was commissioned to go visit the battlefields years later. So he wrote this book called 13 Years After, where he goes back. Will Bird, the soldier, now a writer, is sent back to the front and just walk up and down what remains of the line and just see what it looks like now. See what's there, see what people remember. And 13 years later, they're still clearing battlefields, you know? Really, really compelling. So, Will Bird, Ghosts Have Warm Hands. Will Bird, 13 Years After. Generals Die in Bed by Charles Yale Harrison, also a great one. Robert Graves, Goodbye to All That. Graves was one of the British war poets and then got into a lot of trouble when he got wounded. And in around 1917, published a missive that said, we're not doing this anymore. This is insane. And, that caused a lot of problems, man. It was not a popular thing to say. They would shoot you for stuff like that back in 17. Goodbye to All That by Robert Graves is great. Birdsong by Sebastian Faulks is great. So if you're interested in reading, some of those are memoirs, some of those are fiction, just compelling stuff about a compelling time in a war that still captures my imagination. And now we got some music to check out too, all right? There's so much more I could say, but I won't. Perhaps next Remembrance Day. You know, I got to be quick about it because I feel Mariah pushing at my back as I speak. I'm trying to hold her off, kids. I'm trying to hold her off, but she's coming. The decorations are also already beginning to appear. There's somebody in my neighborhood who's got a tree up already. Wow. Can we slow down just a little bit, folks? Can we wait until after November 11th? I'm going to shut up, shutting up. You can find me on the Instagram, JW_Huff. I will repost that sound map thing of the last moments of the war, which is so potent, so profound. You can find me on Facebook at The John Huff Podcast, TikTok at The John Huff Podcast. Gonna see what I can do with Patreon video. We'll see what happens. Hey, if you want to help me out, kids, leave me a rating and review, please, on your favorite podcast platform. That does help the show get noticed. Share these episodes. Please tell your friends. Word of mouth is still the best marketing. I'm trying real hard, fighting the tide, trying to get this show heard. And if you like what I'm doing, if it's warming your cockles, if it's inspiring you, if it's educating you, if it's merely entertaining you, please tell your friends. Please follow me on the socials. Please leave a rating and review. I certainly do appreciate it. Drop me a line. Let me know what you're listening to. Let me know if you checked out any of this music, any of those books, any of those movies. Let me know what Remembrance Day means to you, man. Or if there's music I should check out that I haven't, drop me a line on that too, all right? My website, john-huff.com. You can contact me there or via the socials. Whatever works for you, man. Again, I'm going to shut up, shutting up. Thank you so much for listening. I will be back next week with something. I don't know what, but something. Until then, I'll check you later. Yeah. Hold my breath as I wish for death. Please, God, wake me.